Tonight, we step into a world of secrets hidden in the heart of Rome. Behind towering basilicas and marble halls lies something the faithful were never meant to see. A chamber sealed without record, a silence carried for centuries, and relics that refuse to stay buried. For generations, the Vatican has been the keeper of faith, but also the gatekeeper of knowledge. Manuscripts locked away, relics that whisper of impossible histories, maps that chart lands before they were discovered. Even time itself bent to fit a story written by unseen hands. This is not about faith alone, it is about power, a doctrine that delays truth until it can be controlled. Saints created with staged miracles, inventions borrowed from forbidden rooms and repackaged as Renaissance brilliance, and all of it bound together by silence, a silence strong enough to shape the way you see history itself. So before you dismiss this as rumour, ask yourself one question. What if the world you were taught is not the world that truly was? Like the video, subscribe, because tonight we uncover what the Vatican is hiding from you. There are places within the Vatican where even the most seasoned priests whisper in lowered voices. Imagine corridors lined with marble, polished so smooth they reflect the flicker of candles like water at night. At the very heart of this maze, past doors you are never supposed to open, there is said to be another door. A door with no name, no records, no key, no explanation. It stands as if it should not exist at all, yet it does. And those who claim to have seen it say that it seems to drink in the light around it, leaving the air heavy and strange. Legends tell us this hidden door does not guard scripture or paintings, but something far stranger. Behind it, they say, lies a chamber where objects are kept that challenge every truth we have been taught. A mirror that remembers events it once reflected. A compass that points not north but toward another land no longer on maps. Bones that do not decay. Things that science cannot explain and religion dares not admit. It is not part of the official archives, not part of the vast library. It is something else. Something deliberately unspoken. Why would the world's most powerful religious institution need a room like this? The answer may not be protection, but control. If relics exist that show history unfolded differently, then every sermon, every textbook, every accepted truth could collapse in an instant. Power does not only come from faith, it comes from deciding what people are allowed to believe and what they must never be permitted to see. The name of this hidden room is never written, never spoken officially. But in private whispers among archivists and scholars, it is called the door with no name. Stories stretch back centuries. A monk in the year 1400 writes about a crate that vanished into the lower halls. A palace guard in the year 1750 swore he heard metal grinding behind a wall that did not appear on any map. Even in modern times, researchers speak of sudden restrictions, whole corridors closed overnight with no explanation, only to reopen months later with the stone walls mysteriously altered. The Vatican denies such tales, of course, but denial can be the strongest proof of all. For why deny what no one is supposed to know? Why fear words that describe something that allegedly does not exist? The silence is more telling than any admission. It suggests that the legend is not fantasy, but fact carefully hidden beneath centuries of ritual. If such a door stands, then behind it must rest a collection of secrets that could rewrite our very place in history. Imagine what it would mean to open it, to see artifacts that prove humanity once reached heights we no longer understand, to touch a map older than the continents we walk upon today, to realize that the story we grew up with may only be a fragment of something far greater. The Door with No Name is not simply a story about a room, it is a story about fear. Fear of what would happen if truth no longer belonged to those who guard it, and perhaps that is why the door remains locked. Because what waits beyond it is not just relics, but the memory of a world we were never meant to remember. In the hushed corridors of the Vatican, where the air smells faintly of old parchment and candle smoke, there are men and women who spend their entire lives among shelves taller than houses, They catalogue, preserve, and guard the memory of civilization. They are called archivists, yet they are also gatekeepers of silence. One of them, after more than 40 years of service, decided to speak, not loudly, not in public, but in careful hints to those who listened closely. He was an old man by the time he began to share what haunted him. His hair was white, his fingers twisted from decades of turning fragile pages, yet his eyes remained sharp. He explained that what the Vatican calls documents do not always look like books or scrolls. Some are not paper at all. They are objects, artifacts, relics that carry with them stories too dangerous to be told openly. He never revealed how many existed, but the way his voice shook suggested more than a few. One night, after the archives had closed, he invited a trusted colleague into a chamber far from the main halls. There, under dim lamps, he spoke of what he had seen but was never meant to record. He described a mirror made of black stone that seemed to show not the reflection of the present, but scenes of the past. He whispered about a compass that did not point north, but turned stubbornly toward a place erased from modern maps. He even claimed there were bones in sealed boxes, belonging to figures declared saints, yet their flesh had never rotted, as though time itself refused to touch them. His warning was not just about the existence of these relics, but about the system that surrounded them. According to him, each artifact came with instructions, not on how to use them, but on how to bury their meaning. The objects were kept in silence, their stories erased, their significance rewritten. A relic that hinted at a lost civilization was relabeled as a symbol of faith. A device that proved advanced knowledge was reduced to a miracle. Nothing was ever destroyed, yet nothing was ever allowed to shine in the open. The archivist admitted that he once believed in the mission of preservation. He thought the church kept these items safe until the world was ready. But decades passed, and he realized the world would never be ready, because readiness was never the goal. The goal was control. As long as only a handful of men knew the full truth, they could decide what humanity was allowed to believe. His last words before retirement carried a weight heavier than the tomes he spent his life guarding. He said, "Beware the documents that are not written, for they tell the stories no one dares to read aloud." He urged his colleague never to stop questioning, because silence, he warned, can be more dangerous than lies. The archivist left his post quietly, with no public speech, no recognition for his years of service, yet his warning echoes like footsteps in a locked corridor. Somewhere within the Vatican, behind shelves no visitor will ever see, there may lie not only books, but objects that could bend history itself. And perhaps the greatest question is not what they are, but why we are never meant to know they exist. In the Vatican, every wall and corridor has been measured, mapped, and restored across centuries. Architects, masons, and engineers have drawn countless plans to keep the ancient palace from crumbling under the weight of time. Yet hidden within those plans is a silence that no one dares to explain. It begins in the 17th century, when a set of maintenance blueprints first revealed something peculiar. Between two long corridors, one used by servants and the other by priests, there is a space marked not as a room, but as a blank void. No doorway leads to it, no purpose is written beside it. It is simply there, like a shadow that refuses to vanish. The strangest part is that every renovation since that time has carefully ignored this void. Painters restore ceilings, masons repair staircases, electricians run wires through the walls, but no one ever acknowledges the empty space that lies between. It is as if they were warned never to disturb it. Some schematics show the corridors narrowing, others show added rooms around it, yet the void remains untouched, deliberately omitted as though it were invisible. Generations of workers have passed, but the silence continues. One engineer in the 18th century tried to note the absence in his records. He sketched out the lines of the walls and left a faint mark where the void should be, writing the words "cavity unexplained." Within months, his plans were replaced by new ones with the mark removed, no reason given. His draft vanished into the depths of the archive. No one mentioned it again. The blueprints themselves tell a story of control. In normal architecture, voids are temporary, spaces waiting to be filled. But this one is permanent. Even when great renovations swept across the Vatican in the 19th century, when entire wings were redesigned, the void endured unchanged. Scholars who later studied these blueprints noticed the gap but could find no permission to investigate. The official explanation was simple neglect, yet nothing in the Vatican is left to neglect. Every corridor has a purpose. Every wall has a reason, except this one. Whispers grew that the void was more than just space. Some believed it was a sealed chamber built to protect relics that the church did not wish to destroy but could never reveal. Others claimed it was a prison for objects that carried dangers beyond understanding, a kind of vault where silence itself acted as the lock. The idea spread among archivists that the room might hold artifacts catalogued not as treasures but as threats. Even today, researchers who gain rare access to the Vatican's old schematics admit the gap is still there. It stretches like an absence across the maps, never shrinking, never shifting. A silence preserved not by accident, but by deliberate choice. And in that silence lies the most troubling question of all. If the Vatican has gone to such lengths to protect an empty space, then perhaps it is not empty at all. Perhaps behind the walls rests a secret too heavy for even centuries of blueprints to bear. In the year 1887, after the death of a nobleman whose estate was filled with curiosities gathered across Europe, Vatican officials arrived quietly to confiscate certain items. Among the crates of manuscripts and relics, one object drew particular attention. It was a brass instrument, no larger than a man's hand, but unlike anything the archivists had seen before. Half of it resembled an astrolabe, the ancient device used to chart stars and measure time. The other half was a wheel etched with strange symbols, arranged in circles like a cipher waiting to be solved. It looked like a tool, but it also looked like a secret. At first glance, the device appeared decorative, a nobleman's oddity, but closer inspection revealed engravings that matched floor patterns found within St. Peter's Basilica itself. Small geometric stars, intersecting circles, and a cross design were carved in exact proportion to those beneath the basilica's dome. This was no coincidence. Someone had designed the instrument to connect directly with the Vatican's most sacred ground. Archivists debated what it could unlock. Some argued it was part of an astronomical set, a way to align the heavens with holy architecture. Others whispered it might not be an instrument of measurement at all, but a key, one that required alignment with the symbols on the basilica floor to reveal something hidden. The most daring suggestion was that it could open the unnamed door buried deep within the palace, the very chamber whose existence was denied in every public record. The nobleman's journals, seized alongside the device, offered fragments of the truth. He wrote of a journey to Rome, where he spent nights sketching the basilica's floor by candlelight. He mentioned meeting a cloaked cleric who spoke of the path beneath the stone sun. He never explained what that meant, but in one passage he described placing the brass wheel on the ground and watching its shadow fall perfectly along the engraved lines, as though the building itself was speaking. Days later, he recorded being followed by strangers, his home searched, his letters intercepted. When the Vatican took possession of the instrument, it vanished into the archives, never displayed, never mentioned again. Yet the mystery clung to those who had glimpsed it. Why would the church be so interested in a simple piece of brass, unless it held the power to reveal something it could not control? There are rumours even now that replicas were secretly made, passed among scholars who believed the device could decode hidden layers of architecture, revealing entrances to sealed chambers. Some even claim the wheel, when turned correctly, aligns not with stars above, but with voids below, pointing towards spaces deliberately omitted from maps. The key that is not a key remains one of the strangest puzzles ever whispered about the Vatican's secret collection. It may be nothing more than a curiosity, but if its engravings truly connect with the floor of St. Peter's Basilica, then perhaps it was never designed to unlock a door of wood or stone. Perhaps it was built to unlock memory itself, forcing the building to reveal what lies hidden beneath its sacred shadow. It was the winter of 1923 when whispers began to spread through the narrow streets outside the Vatican walls. A delivery had arrived under heavy guard in the middle of the night, its movements hidden from the public eye, yet impossible to keep completely secret. Those who worked the night shift near the palace gates described a single wooden crate carried on a cart drawn by 2 horses, flanked by men in long coats who did not speak. The crate was stamped with the words liturgical hardware, a label used for candlesticks, chalices, or other church objects. But the way it was handled suggested it was something far more important or far more dangerous. Witnesses claimed the guards never let the crate touch the ground. Even when they stopped to adjust the cartwheels, they kept the box held firmly, as if afraid it might break through the earth itself. The guards did not wear the uniforms of the Swiss Guard, but darker clothes without insignia. They moved quickly, their torches kept low, guiding the cart through side passages rather than the main gates. Everything about their manner suggested secrecy, not ceremony. The crate was logged at the entrance desk of the archive. The register, still preserved today, lists it in plain ink as liturgical hardware, nothing more. Yet in the margins of that same page, a faint mark was left by the clerk on duty, a small triangle sketched quickly, then smudged out. Scholars who later saw the record argued that it was a signal, a private code used by staff to warn that something unusual had passed through their hands. What happened next is where the story becomes stranger. The crate was taken to the lower levels of the Apostolic Palace, into a lift shaft that, according to modern schematics, does not exist anymore. Several witnesses swore the lift descended further than any basement should, creaking with chains and vanishing into silence. When the guards returned, the cart was empty. The crate had disappeared. Years later, when the Vatican underwent renovations, workers uncovered the remains of an old lift shaft, bricked over and sealed. Official statements called it a collapsed passage no longer in use. But those who remembered the delivery night were not convinced. They whispered that the shaft led to a chamber where objects too troubling for daylight were stored, a chamber erased from maps so thoroughly that even its lift was written out of existence. No one ever saw the crate again. Rumours suggest it contained an artifact recovered from an excavation in the Middle East, an object wrapped in cloth that hummed when touched. Others believe it was a collection of manuscripts that contradicted the accepted story of the early church. Whatever it was, the fact that it vanished so completely tells its own truth. The night of the uncatalogued delivery remains one of the most unsettling mysteries in Vatican history. Not because of what was brought inside, but because of how carefully it was hidden afterward. When something enters the archives with no record of what it truly is, when even the lift that carried it vanishes from memory, it raises a haunting question. What kind of truth is so dangerous that it cannot even exist on paper? In the year 1836, a Vatican librarian named Carlo Ventresca prepared a catalogue of the holdings inside the archives. It was supposed to be routine, a simple listing of manuscripts, codices, and registers meant for internal use. Yet buried within his careful handwriting was a section unlike the others. Instead of titles of books or dates of documents, he marked down a curious heading. It read Index Annex. What followed was not a list of words, but a series of objects: a mirror, a bronze tongue, a lens. He did not describe them fully, only left cryptic notes beside each, as if even naming them was forbidden. Ventresca's catalogue was quietly circulated among archivists, and for a time it was accepted as part of the official record. Yet when later editions of the catalogue were printed, the entire section vanished. The index annex was gone as though it had never been written. Not a single note about objects remained. only the familiar lists of manuscripts and papal bulls. Scholars who compared the early draft with the later version noticed the disappearance immediately and began to whisper among themselves. Who had ordered the erasure and why? Some believe Ventresca stumbled too close to a secret chamber and chose to record it honestly, never realizing the danger. Others think he may have been trying to leave a message, a coded clue that someone in the future could follow. Whatever his reasons, his addition was considered a violation of the unwritten law of silence. To acknowledge objects was to risk revealing that the Vatican preserved not only words, but relics that could alter history. There are fragments of correspondence from that period suggesting high officials were furious about Ventresca's draft. One letter between two cardinals speaks of a librarian who overstepped his station by listing things that do not belong to history. Another note warns that careless records might endanger the stability of faith. Within a year, Ventresca was reassigned to a remote monastery and never again permitted near the main archives. His name faded from memory, but the shadow of his index remained. The erasure itself may be more telling than the entry. The Church could have ignored the mistake, left it buried in obscure notes. Instead, they acted with speed and precision, rewriting the catalogues, recalling copies, and punishing the man who dared to write the truth. Such urgency suggests the index annex was not a fantasy, it was real, and it pointed toward a collection hidden deeper than any shelf of parchment. Today, Ventresca's original draft is said to survive in only one copy, locked within a private vault, consulted by almost no one. But the mere whisper of its existence has fueled endless speculation. Was the annex a preliminary catalogue of the very room with no name? Did the objects he listed truly exist within Vatican walls? If so, they have been erased not from reality, but from memory, silenced by ink, as effectively as by fire. The index that vanished leaves behind a haunting lesson. Sometimes, the greatest secrets are not hidden by walls or locks, but by the careful removal of words. And when an institution has the power to decide which words remain and which are erased, the difference between truth and silence becomes impossible to see. In the deepest whispers of the Vatican, there is talk of an object unlike any holy relic, a mirror not made of silver or glass, but of black volcanic stone, polished to a flawless sheen. Those who have heard of it call it the mirror that remembers. Unlike ordinary mirrors, it does not return your face when you stand before it. Instead, it shows something far more unsettling, scenes not of the present, but of what the place around it once witnessed. To look into it is not to see yourself, but to see ghosts of time. The mirror is said to be made of obsidian, a material revered by ancient civilizations for its strange reflective power. Legends claim it was first discovered in the ruins of a Spanish monastery during the 17th century, hidden beneath collapsed stone as if deliberately buried. The monks who unearthed it described visions that terrified them. They claimed they saw men in Roman armour marching where the cloister stood, and even darker visions of fire consuming the halls centuries before the monastery was ever built. Alarmed, they sealed the mirror with wax and sent it to Rome, where it disappeared into the Vatican's custody. What makes the story impossible to dismiss are the scattered accounts of archivists who claim to have seen it before it was hidden away. One wrote that when a candle was lit near the mirror, the flame did not reflect as it should. Instead, the surface revealed a crowded marketplace, people walking across cobblestones that no longer exist. Another described seeing a battlefield with banners whipping in the wind, yet when he blinked, the image was gone, replaced by darkness. Each vision appeared tied not to the person looking into it, but to the ground beneath their feet. The mirror remembered the place itself, not the viewer. To prevent further curiosity, the Vatican is said to have coated its surface with a thick layer of wax, sealing away whatever visions might remain. The reliquary that holds it carries only a simple mark, a cross within a circle, and no public inventory admits it exists. Yet the fear it inspired lingers in private notes. Some priests believed the mirror was a window into memory, proof that the earth itself keeps record of every event it has witnessed. Others feared it was a trap, a device meant to lure men into obsession, showing them glimpses of past sins and tragedies until they lost their minds. Imagine what such an object would mean if revealed today. Historians could witness ancient battles as they truly happened, uncover truths that have been lost for centuries, or expose lies written into textbooks. But perhaps that is exactly why it was hidden. If memory can be preserved not only in books, but in objects that never forget, then control of history no longer belongs to those who write it. It belongs to those who dare to look. The mirror that remembers remains one of the most haunting whispers of the Vatican's forbidden collection. Sealed away in silence, its black surface hides centuries of visions that no one is permitted to see. And perhaps that is the greatest warning of all. Some truths are not destroyed. They are locked in mirrors that wait patiently in the dark, remembering everything we were never meant to know. Hidden within the secret reliquaries of the Vatican, there is said to rest an object that has terrified even the priests tasked with guarding it. It is not a relic of a saint, nor a fragment of the cross. It is a device forged in bronze, shaped uncannily like the tongue of a serpent. Thin, forked, and curved, it rests within a carved wooden case lined with soot, as if it had been burned more than once. Those who have dared to handle it insist it is mechanical, not ornamental. And when it is heated, whether by fire or even the warmth of a candle flame, it begins to do something that no relic should ever do. It speaks. The sound it makes is not a simple hiss of metal expanding. It forms syllables, harsh, broken words that echo like a chant from another age. Scholars who heard recordings of the device swore the words matched no modern tongue, but bore similarities to fragments of a language found only in ancient inscriptions, a dialect long declared dead. The Vatican insists these claims are misunderstandings, but the men who witnessed it firsthand left journals filled with trembling handwriting. They described the voice as neither human nor mechanical, a hollow resonance that carried meaning even if they could not translate it. Stories trace its discovery back to the ruins of a collapsed Roman villa unearthed in the late 18th century. The villa itself was strange, decorated with serpentine motifs, mosaics of coiled snakes devouring their tails. The bronze tongue was found sealed in a jar of ash. Local workers who first uncovered it believed it cursed and begged priests to take it away. Within weeks, Vatican envoys arrived, carrying the relic to Rome, where it vanished into storage. The official record called it a piece of pagan metalwork, yet the whispers continued. What truly unsettled the archivists was the pattern of the words it spoke. Some claimed the syllables repeated like a code, each phrase containing hidden numbers or alignments. One Jesuit priest secretly compared the sounds to star maps and found startling correlations. The syllables seemed to mark positions of planets across centuries, as if the tongue was not speaking but calculating. If true, the relic was not a religious artifact, but a machine of knowledge, a device capable of preserving information through sound. The Vatican has never confirmed the existence of the tongue of bronze. Those who have written about it often recanted later, their works suppressed or withdrawn. Yet rumours persist that the object was tested during the 19th century, and that its words grew louder the longer it was heated, as if feeding on flame itself. Some fear it was designed to speak a message, waiting for a listener who understands, a warning or command preserved through ages. Imagine what it would mean if such a device were revealed today, a machine that carries a language no one admits to knowing, a serpent's tongue that speaks from fire. Was it the invention of a forgotten civilization, or something far older, something meant to outlast empires? Perhaps that is why it rests in silence, hidden in a vault beneath stone walls, its voice locked away from the world. For if the tongue of bronze is ever allowed to speak freely, the story it tells may unravel the history we thought was true. Among the whispers of the Vatican's hidden room, there is one relic that has drawn more suspicion than almost any other. It is not a jewel, not a bone, not a cross of gold. It is a map. A piece of vellum, stretched and preserved in a glass case, marked with coastlines and rivers. Yet the strangest detail is this. The map does not have north, no compass rose, no guiding arrow. It is as if direction itself was considered irrelevant. And the lands it shows are not the ones we grew up seeing in our schoolbooks. The map displays continents with shapes eerily familiar, yet subtly altered. Europe appears compressed, Africa stretches farther south, and across the ocean lies a vast coastline, almost identical to South America, centuries before it was supposed to be drawn. Rivers twist through landscapes where no rivers flow today. Mountain ranges rise where plains should be. The map looks like a version of Earth, not as it is, but as it once was, or as it might have been. When scientists secretly tested the ink in the 20th century, they found something even more troubling. The ink was older than the parchment itself. The writing had been applied with a formula that predated the animal skin on which it was drawn, suggesting the map had been copied from a source even older. According to fragments of Vatican records, the map was acquired during the 15th century from a group of travelling scholars in Venice. They claimed it came from a library destroyed in fire, its origins unknown. The scholars begged the church to preserve it, warning that its details did not match any known chart. Soon after, the map disappeared into silence. The scholars themselves faded from history, their names barely remembered. Those who have seen the map insist its rivers hold the real key. They flow in directions impossible for today's geography, as though the land itself had shifted. Some geologists, who caught glimpses of sketches, believe the map may record Earth before a great catastrophe, before coastlines and climates changed. If true, the document is not just a chart, but a memory of the planet itself, proof that civilizations before us knew things we still struggle to confirm. Why then would the Vatican lock it away? The answer is simple. A map without north undermines more than geography. It questions the story of discovery, the pride of empires, and the authority of explorers who claimed to chart the world for the first time. If knowledge of distant lands existed long before Columbus, if rivers once flowed differently, then history itself is built on shaky ground. Legends say the map glows faintly under candlelight, the ink shifting like water, as if reminding viewers that the world is never fixed. The Church fears such uncertainty. Faith requires stability, clear borders, and fixed truths. A map that shows Earth as something fluid, something forgotten, is dangerous. The map without north is not simply a relic of exploration. It is a mirror of what was erased, a glimpse of a world hidden beneath centuries of silence. And if ever revealed, it could redraw not only our coastlines, but our understanding of time itself. In a vault, where relics are meant to inspire faith, there lies an object that inspires only questions. It is a shard of glass, but not the fragile, uneven glass familiar to the medieval world. This one has been shaped into a lens so perfect that even modern scientists struggle to understand it. When held to the eye, it bends light with absolute precision. No blur, no distortion, no flaw. Experts who briefly studied it whispered that its grind suggests techniques that should not have existed for more than 1,000 years. Yet it rests not in a laboratory, but in a reliquary, sealed in a frame, stamped with the seal of a bishop whose name has been erased from official lists. The shard is often called the impossible glass because it does not belong to its supposed time. According to hidden notes, it was recovered in the early 17th century from the ruins of a monastery in southern France. The monks who guarded it claimed it came from Rome itself, passed down through hands that never explained its origin. The bishop's seal stamped onto its brass frame suggests the church claimed ownership long before it was locked away. But why would a bishop seal a scientific instrument unless it carried a power the church feared losing? The lens reveals details invisible to the naked eye. When directed toward the heavens, it shows stars and planets with such clarity that early astronomers could have rewritten the map of the universe centuries before telescopes were invented. When pointed at the smallest objects, it magnifies with sharpness, rivaling modern microscopes. Imagine what discoveries could have been made if such a tool had been shared with the world. Diseases could have been studied, stars charted, maps corrected, yet none of that happened. Instead, the lens was hidden, its frame stamped as proof of ownership, its very existence silenced. The few who recorded its properties described a strange sensation when looking through it. They claimed the world appeared almost too clear, as if reality itself had been stripped of its veil. Colours grew sharper, shadows deeper, edges more alive. Some even reported dizziness, as if the eye was not prepared for so much truth. Perhaps the shard was more than an instrument. Perhaps it was designed to awaken perception, to remind humanity that there is always more than what we are taught to see. The question of how it was made remains unanswered. Medieval glassmaking could not have produced such flawless clarity. Grinding techniques of the 17th century fell short of this perfection. Even modern optics find difficulty reproducing it without advanced machinery. This leads to a troubling possibility. The shard may be a fragment of knowledge carried from a lost civilization, preserved quietly by the Church, then sealed away when its implications grew too dangerous. The shard of impossible glass is a reminder that sometimes the most threatening relics are not weapons or curses, but tools. Tools that reveal too much, too soon. And so it sits in silence beneath the Vatican, locked behind stone, waiting for eyes brave enough to see the world as it truly is. In a locked reliquary beneath the Vatican rests a small box made of oak darkened with age. Inside are bones, but not the brittle yellow fragments we expect from saints or martyrs. These bones are small, the delicate finger bones of a single hand, yet they appear unrotted and disturbingly alive. Their surface is pale and smooth, their joints still flexible, as though flesh had only just been stripped away. What makes them stranger still are the notes attached to the box. They claim the bones belong to a man once called a saint, a man who was later excommunicated, not for sin, but for speaking too much of what he had seen. The story of the man is almost erased from records. His name is scratched from church lists, his writings burned, his memory reduced to rumour. Yet fragments survive in the margins of manuscripts. They speak of a monk in the 12th century who claimed he was shown visions of the church's hidden vaults. He said he saw relics stored not to be worshipped, but to be silenced, objects that carried truths too heavy for the world. He wrote that faith was not in danger from demons, but from secrets buried beneath stone. For this he was branded a liar, a heretic, and after his death the Vatican went further. He was stripped of sainthood, declared cursed, and condemned to be forgotten. Yet his bones refused to decay. When his tomb was opened generations later, those who touched them reported a shock like static, a tingling that ran up the arm. The bones bent as if still alive. Terrified, the priests who unearthed them declared them unnatural and ordered them locked away. To admit their existence would be to admit that his words might have been true, that God himself had preserved him not in honour but in warning. The notes attached to the reliquary are written in careful Latin. They state simply that the bones must never be displayed, never be called relics, and never be shown to pilgrims. They are to remain in silence as a reminder that truth can outlive the men who speak it. The handwriting suggests the notes were written by more than one archivist across centuries, each repeating the command, each refusing to destroy what they feared. What would it mean if the bones were revealed today? Scientists would demand to study them, to learn why they have not decayed. Historians would ask whose hand they belonged to and what he truly saw. Believers might see them as a miracle, proof of holiness, even in disgrace. But the Vatican cannot allow that, because the bones are tied to a man who accused them of hiding history. If his words were confirmed, centuries of control would begin to crack. The bones that do not corrupt, are not just a relic, they are a symbol, a reminder that even when names are erased and voices silenced, the body itself may carry memory. Locked in their oak box, they still whisper without words, bending slightly in the dark, waiting for the day when silence no longer holds. Deep within the forbidden shelves of the Vatican is said to rest a strange instrument, a compass unlike any sailor has ever known. It is small, no larger than the palm of a hand, encased in brass that has dulled with centuries. At first glance, it appears ordinary, a needle balanced carefully above a faded dial. But those who have studied it whisper that the needle does not behave as it should. It does not settle only toward north. Instead, it shifts, stabilizing in two entirely different directions depending on the phase of the moon. Under the light of the new moon, it points as every compass should, guiding toward the familiar north. But when the moon swells to fullness, the needle swings and locks on another path, leading somewhere no map records. The object has come to be known as the compass of two poles. What makes it more unsettling are the notes scribbled in the margins of the parchment stored beside it. The handwriting is old, likely 15th century, and it lists travel distances not across known trade routes, but across a sea described only as the pathway to lands unwritten. The calculations suggest voyages far longer than those attempted by explorers of the age, journeys to places that should not have been known. If true, this compass did more than guide sailors. It hinted at a second geography, a hidden world mapped not by kingdoms but by secret hands. Some historians believe the compass may have been designed for long-lost travellers who charted coastlines before the age of discovery. Others whisper it might have been part of a deliberate concealment, a tool that revealed lands to a chosen few while hiding them from the rest of humanity. Imagine the power such an object would grant. While kings funded expeditions that stumbled blindly into oceans, a navigator with the compass of two poles could sail with certainty, guided by forces tied not to the earth but to the sky. The moon itself would decide the path, unlocking hidden routes when the time was right. This raises troubling questions. Were there entire civilizations visited in secret? Did explorers reach distant shores centuries before the official histories admit, using instruments like this one to guide them? The Vatican's decision to bury the compass in silence suggests the answer may be yes. If revealed, the artifact would prove that the great tales of discovery were not firsts at all, but carefully staged rediscoveries. It would show that lands we were told were unknown had been charted long before, their memory deliberately erased. The silence preserves the illusion that history unfolded naturally, rather than being guided by hidden knowledge. Even now, the compass waits in its brass casing, needle still steady, ready to swing when the moon rises full. Its existence reminds us that direction is not always fixed, that north is not the only truth. Sometimes, another pole waits just beyond the horizon, pointing toward a world we were never meant to find. And perhaps one day, when the right hands hold it again, the compass of two poles will reveal the lands that history tried to forget. In the 16th century, the world was changing at a speed no one could ignore. Ships sailed to the edges of the known earth, carrying missionaries who spread the message of faith to new lands. The Jesuits were among the most devoted of these missionaries, but hidden within their travels was a purpose far less holy. Scattered records suggest that behind the sermons and the conversions, there existed a quiet conduit, a collection route designed not for souls, but for artifacts. Under the banner of preservation, they siphoned objects of power and knowledge from distant cultures, sending them back to Rome where they would be locked in silence. Official reports from Jesuit missions often described the confiscation of idols or instruments deemed pagan. They claimed it was necessary to protect new converts from temptation. Yet private letters tell another story. Missionaries wrote of crates shipped discreetly from South America, Asia, and Africa, each filled not with relics of superstition, but with objects of astonishing craftsmanship. a lens sharper than European glass, maps with coastlines that should not have been known, devices that seemed to echo voices or track the stars with uncanny precision. Each item disappeared into the network of monasteries, never to be seen again. The conduit worked like a shadow supply chain. Artifacts were catalogued under false names, shipped as holy goods, and delivered to select Jesuit houses in Italy, Spain, and France. From there, they travelled along routes hidden within legitimate trade, finally arriving in Rome under the watchful eye of archivists who knew exactly where to place them. No public record admitted their existence, yet whispers among the missionaries themselves confirmed that the church valued these objects more than the gold and silver stripped from native temples. What makes the Jesuit conduit more chilling is how it blended into faith. While converts were taught to burn their ancestral symbols, priests quietly chose which ones to keep, not for worship, but for study and control. It was as if the Vatican sought to gather every trace of forgotten knowledge into one vault, ensuring no rival civilization or faith could claim ownership of truths that might challenge the Church's authority. To the world, the missionaries appeared as humble servants. But to those who looked closer, they were collectors in plain robes, funneling the world's secrets into the heart of Europe. Even today, some scholars suspect that many of the strangest relics whispered about in Vatican halls arrived through this very route. The mirror that remembers, the tongue of bronze, the compass of two poles. Objects that make little sense within European history, but could have come from civilizations far beyond. If true, the Jesuit conduit was not only about preserving relics, it was about rewriting the timeline of human achievement, deciding which knowledge would be remembered and which would vanish. The story of the Jesuit conduit reveals a disturbing pattern. Faith was not the only thing spread across oceans. Silence was. And through that silence, entire cultures had their knowledge taken from them, not destroyed, but hidden beneath stone walls where the world would never be allowed to see. In the year 1692, an unusual trial was held within the Vatican walls. It was not public, nor was it announced in church proclamations. The minutes of this trial survive only in fragments, tucked between pages of unrelated records, as though someone tried to bury them in plain sight. What makes these minutes extraordinary is that the men accused were not charged with heresy of thought, nor with teaching against doctrine. Their crime was something far stranger. They were accused of being too close to certain objects, relics the Church had long sworn did not exist. The accused were scholars, historians, and archivists who had spent their lives among manuscripts. Their writings never denied God, never challenged Scripture, but they had asked questions about artifacts whispered to be stored in sealed rooms. One was said to have brushed against a black mirror hidden in a reliquary. Another had taken notes on a compass with two poles. A third had copied sketches of a strange bronze device confiscated from a noble estate. None of them were accused of fabricating lies. Instead, the court declared their crime was proximity, that they had stood too near to dangerous truths. The minutes describe the atmosphere of the trial as tense and quiet. No shouting, no debate. The inquisitors asked only narrow questions. Did you see the object? Did you touch it? Did you speak of it to others? Each answer was carefully written down, followed by a single Latin phrase, periculosum, meaning dangerous. The men pleaded that they sought only to preserve knowledge, that silence was a worse sin than curiosity, but the court was unmoved. In the Vatican's view, their innocence or guilt did not matter. What mattered was that they had crossed an invisible line, a line drawn not around belief but around objects. The verdicts were chilling in their simplicity. The scholars were not executed, for their writings were not heretical. Instead, they were banished to remote monasteries, condemned to silence, their names erased from official histories. Their work was seized, their papers destroyed or sealed. One of the minutes records that even their families were warned never to speak of them again. The court declared that such measures were not punishment, but preservation, to keep humanity safe from truths it was not ready to face. What is most haunting about these minutes is what they imply. The Church feared not ideas, but the power of things. If objects existed that could reveal forgotten knowledge, then thought itself could not be controlled. To keep control, the objects had to be hidden, and those who discovered them had to be erased. The trial was not about men, it was about memory. The trial of the relic seekers remains one of the darkest shadows in Vatican history. It reminds us that sometimes the most dangerous heresy is not disbelief, but curiosity. And when curiosity touches what should not exist, the response is not to argue, but to silence. Behind stone walls, the objects endured, but those who dared to approach them vanished into the margins of history, leaving only fragments of minutes that survived by accident, telling us just enough to know that the silence was not empty, it was enforced. In the year 1748, a cartographer named Alessandro Bellini lay on his deathbed in a quiet town outside Florence. For most of his life, he had been celebrated for the accuracy of his maps, praised by merchants and nobles who relied on his charts to guide their ships. But as he grew weaker, he began to speak of things no one expected. With a trembling voice, he confessed that the coastlines for which he had been praised were not drawn from his own discoveries at all. They were traced. He described nights in his youth when he was summoned to a small stone chamber in Rome. The meetings always happened after dusk, when the city was asleep. Inside the chamber, a silent monk awaited him, his hands darkened with ink as though he had spent the day copying manuscripts. The monk never spoke, only slid across the table a set of plates made of thin metal sheets etched with coastlines Bellini did not recognize. He was instructed to copy them onto vellum by candlelight. When the bell of dawn tolled, the plates were taken back, and Bellini was forbidden to ask where they came from. The old mapmaker wept as he described the shapes he had seen. He spoke of a land stretching far to the south that resembled Antarctica, yet was drawn without ice. He spoke of rivers in Africa flowing in directions different from his own time. He remembered coastlines of islands no longer visible on modern maps, some perhaps sunken, others erased. Each detail haunted him, for he realized he was not charting the world as it was, but the world as it had once been. His confession grew darker when he revealed that his most famous maps, the ones praised by explorers, were built from these secret plates. He admitted he was never told their origin, but he believed they came from a collection hidden beneath the Vatican, a place where knowledge too dangerous to reveal was quietly stored. The monk, always silent, returned the plates to the shadows before the first rays of sunlight touched the city. Bellini swore he never saw the same plate twice, as if the collection was too vast for repetition. For decades, he carried the burden of silence, watching as kings and scholars admired his work, never knowing the truth behind it. He lived in fear that the Vatican might punish him if he ever revealed the source. But as death approached, he felt the weight of his deception. He told his family and a priest, who recorded his words, that his maps were not his own. They were fragments of a memory the Church refused to share with the world. The cartographer's confession remains one of the most haunting testimonies ever whispered in secret. If true, it means that maps of lost coastlines and forgotten lands existed centuries before modern exploration. It means that history is not a story of discovery, but of selective revelation. And it means that the silent monk with ink-stained hands was not guiding a cartographer, but guiding the very boundaries of human knowledge, deciding what the world would be allowed to see. In the archives of the Vatican, there survives a letter never meant to be read outside trusted hands. It was written in the year 1583 by an astronomer named Lorenzo Ricci, who served as an advisor during the debates surrounding the new Gregorian calendar. His task was simple: record celestial events with precision and help correct the drift of time that had built up under the Julian system. But his letter, addressed to a fellow scholar, reveals something disturbing. Ricci, describes witnessing a solar eclipse that none of the official records acknowledged. According to him, the sky darkened on the 3rd day of August, yet in the revised calendar, no such eclipse was ever admitted to have taken place. The astronomer insisted his observation was not a mistake. He detailed the exact position of the sun, the shadow cast upon the city, and the strange silence that fell across the countryside as animals grew restless. He even measured the angle of the moon's passage with instruments of his own design. But when he reported his findings to church officials, he was told to adjust his notes. The eclipse, they said, had not happened, for it did not fit the corrected timeline the Vatican intended to enforce. Ricci confessed in his letter that he felt torn. He wanted to preserve truth, but he also feared the consequences of disobedience. He wrote that he had been shown a bronze ring during a private meeting with an archivist. The ring was not meant for ornament, but for calculation. Its surface was etched with a sequence of numbers and symbols representing an alternate calendar, one that aligned with the eclipse he had seen. When he asked about its origin, the archivist said only that it came from the hidden room and that it bore the corrected flow of time, not the one taught to the public. The letter closes with Ricci's despair. He realized that time itself could be rewritten not by altering events, but by controlling which events were officially remembered. If an eclipse could be erased, then so could battles, coronations, even centuries. The bronze ring became for him a symbol of control, proof that the Vatican was not simply measuring time, but reshaping it to fit its own narrative. Centuries later, the existence of Ricci's letter was quietly acknowledged by a handful of scholars, though most dismissed it as a fabrication. Yet the detail of the bronze ring lingers. Whispers claim the object still rests in the hidden room, locked within a glass case, its etchings still sharp, its numbers still capable of recalibrating history. Some even believe the ring is used to check the consistency of the official calendar, ensuring that no contradictions slip through. The astronomer's eclipse reminds us that truth is not always lost in war or fire. Sometimes it is deliberately struck from the record, replaced by silence. A sky that once darkened has been declared forever bright, and the only proof that it ever happened lies in the fading ink of a frightened astronomer's hand and a bronze ring hidden in shadows, silently keeping the true count of time. In the year 1671, an inquisitor named Father Marcellus kept a ledger unlike any other. Most inquisitors recorded confessions, testimonies, and punishments, but his book contained no names of heretics or trials. Instead, it was written in careful script across thick parchment and titled Only Instruments of Testimony. At first glance, it looked like another register of banned texts. Yet, as scholars later discovered, it was not books that filled its pages, but objects. The entries are chilling in their precision. A bronze device shaped like a serpent's tongue, a mirror of black stone, a compass that shifts with the moon. Each description is brief, stripped of details, as though Father Marcellus was forbidden to say too much. But what strikes the reader most are the words that appear beside many of the items. Where a verdict should have been written, guilty or absolved, he wrote instead a single Latin word, absconditum, hidden. That word repeats again and again, filling the margins like a silent command. These were not artifacts to be destroyed, nor to be worshipped. They were to be hidden, removed from the reach of ordinary men. Some of the entries even include the note in Manus Vaticana, meaning placed in Vatican hands. It suggests a direct pipeline between the Inquisition and the secret chambers of the Church, where objects deemed too dangerous were transferred in silence. Father Marcellus seemed deeply aware of the weight of what he recorded. In one surviving passage, he wrote that these instruments testify not to men's sins, but to truths unfit for daylight. He admitted he feared them more than heresy itself, for heresy could be silenced by fire, but objects could not be destroyed without erasing memory itself. He believed his task was not to judge, but to conceal, to ensure that these instruments would never again be seen outside locked stone walls. What makes the ledger extraordinary is how it blurs the line between faith and fear. It shows that the Inquisition was not only about hunting ideas, it was also about managing evidence, confiscating physical proof that could destabilize the Church's version of history. If a relic spoke with its own voice, if a mirror revealed memories of the past, if a map showed lands unknown, the Inquisitors did not debate its meaning. They marked it absconditum and passed it into silence. The ledger survived only because a single copy was smuggled out during a chaotic transfer of documents in the 18th century. Today it remains in fragments, with pages missing, words scratched out, and stains of wax as if it had been sealed and resealed many times. Yet, even in fragments, it tells a story of fear disguised as preservation. The Inquisitor's ledger is more than a list. It is proof that the Vatican not only controlled people and ideas, but also the objects that threatened to tell their own story. Every entry marked hidden is a reminder that history is not merely written. It is also locked away, line by line, artifact by artifact, until the truth itself becomes nothing more than an entry in a secret book. Throughout the dim corridors of history, there are whispers of a brotherhood that never appeared in official records, yet their presence can be traced in the shadows. They were not knights or priests, but men who called themselves conservators, a quiet order that believed truth must sleep until the world was ready to face it. These were the pilgrims of the unseen. Unlike missionaries who spread the faith, their journeys were secret. They ferried relics between monasteries, cloisters, and remote sanctuaries, ensuring that the most troubling artifacts never lingered too long in one place. Legends say their existence began in the 14th century, when schisms threatened to fracture the church. Amid fears that forbidden relics might fall into the wrong hands, a circle of monks formed a vow. They pledged to carry these objects across borders under the cover of pilgrimage, moving them like ghosts so that no scholar, king, or heretic could ever claim them. They travelled in pairs, never writing their names, never leaving records. If they were caught, they would be mistaken for ordinary pilgrims walking to holy shrines. Yet hidden in their satchels were things far more dangerous than bread or rosaries. Witnesses who encountered them described an unsettling discipline. The pilgrims walked barefoot on certain nights, whispering prayers in languages that seemed older than Latin. They carried their burdens wrapped in waxed cloth, never opening them, never speaking of their contents. Some believed they did not even know what they carried, only that it must remain unseen. In this way, relics moved silently across mountains, rivers, and deserts, vanishing from cities where curiosity had grown too sharp. The most haunting detail is their philosophy. Unlike inquisitors who burned heretics or archivists who sealed knowledge in vaults, the pilgrims believed hiding was an act of mercy. They were convinced that the human mind could not endure the weight of certain truths. A mirror that remembered, a map without north, bones that refused to decay. They argued that to reveal such things would break the fragile order of the world. Better to let them sleep until a future age could bear their presence. There are traces of their work in scattered letters. A monk in Spain wrote of a pair of pilgrims who passed through his cloister, carrying a brass box they refused to open even under threat of death. In Germany, an abbess described men who left behind a sealed chest marked with a strange circle and vanished before dawn. In Poland, a record survives of two figures arrested as spies, only to be released when local priests intervened on their behalf. Each time, the trail ends with silence, the relics gone, the pilgrims forgotten. If the pilgrims of the unseen truly existed, it means that the Vatican's network of secrecy was not confined to walls. It walked across the earth, carrying forbidden objects like embers wrapped in cloth, never extinguished but never allowed to flame. And perhaps that is why so few of these relics have ever been glimpsed. They were never left to gather dust in one chamber. They were always moving, always sleeping, waiting for the moment someone dares to lift the cloth and awaken them to the light of day. For centuries, visitors to Europe's cathedrals have marvelled at their soaring spires, intricate stained glass, and labyrinthine floor patterns. But some scholars whisper that these grand structures are more than monuments to faith. They are codes, stone and glass ciphers, concealing knowledge about the hidden room said to lie beneath the Vatican. Floor plans, when studied carefully, reveal geometric alignments that do not simply serve beauty, but point toward coordinates. The pattern of nave and transept, of circles inscribed within squares, may in fact be a map. The most compelling clue lies in rose windows. To the casual tourist, they are dazzling wheels of light, their petals radiating outward in perfect symmetry. Yet when compared across cathedrals, the designs repeat with unusual consistency. Certain roses align with stars, others with the solstices, but a few point to something far more specific. Hidden within their geometry are directional codes. Lines traced through the centre petals lead straight toward Rome, converging not at St. Peter's Basilica, as one might expect, but at a modest chapel tucked away on Vatican grounds, a place most visitors never see. The chapel itself is small and unremarkable, often skipped by tour guides. Yet, legends claim that beneath its stone floor lies an entrance, not to a crypt, but to a passage sealed since the 17th century. Builders of the Renaissance may have known this, encoding directions into their cathedrals so that only those trained to read the language of architecture could follow. To the public, the windows are decoration. To the initiated, they are arrows pointing to the truth. Architectural drawings, smuggled from the Vatican Archives, show patterns that reinforce this theory. One floor plan of Chartres Cathedral mirrors almost exactly the layout of the Apostolic Palace, its nave stretching like a shadow of Rome. When overlaid, the two maps suggest that the hidden room is not random, but deliberately anchored to a network of sacred geometry spanning across Europe. The cathedrals become more than churches. They are signposts, guiding the faithful toward a secret buried at the heart of Catholic power. Why would architects risk encoding such a secret? Some believe it was their silent rebellion, a way to ensure knowledge of the chamber's existence could never be erased entirely. Others argue they were instructed to do so, part of a controlled transmission of memory, ensuring that if one day the chamber needed to be found again, the path would be recoverable through stone. Either way, the result is the same. Pilgrims walking on patterned floors and gazing at windows of glass have been treading unknowingly across maps. If the rose windows truly point toward the chapel, then the architecture itself becomes proof of the Vatican's concealed history. Every cathedral would stand as a silent collaborator, a monument not only to God, but to secrecy. Architecture as cipher turns the very ground beneath our feet into a code, and for those who dare to read it, the message is clear. The entrance to the chamber does not lie where crowds gather, but beneath a chapel most tourists never visit, where geometry and silence intersect to guard what was never meant to be seen. In the oldest passages beneath the Apostolic Palace, there is said to stand a door unlike any other. It is not carved wood or gilded bronze, not even the iron gates that guard crypts and tombs. This door is a single slab of black basalt, streaked with veins of iron, smooth as glass yet colder than ice to the touch. Those who have stood before it claim that candles gutter and dim, as if the stone itself swallows the flame. Even prayers whispered in its presence echo strangely, the words returning, stretched and hollow, as though the door does not reflect sound but absorbs it. For this reason, it is called the door that drinks light. Legends say it was built in the 17th century, but others argue it is far older, perhaps older than the palace itself. The basalt does not match local stone, nor does it resemble any material used in Roman or medieval construction. Geologists who once examined fragments taken from the threshold reported that the stone bore markings of volcanic origin, likely from distant lands, yet no record explains how a single flawless slab of such weight was transported to Rome. Its presence feels deliberate, as though chosen not for strength, but for some property yet unknown. The door has no visible handle, no hinges, and no seams. Instead, at its centre rests a shallow indentation shaped like a circle, intersected with lines. A design that matches perfectly the engravings found on the brass instrument, often called the non-key. Witnesses claim that when the instrument is placed within the indentation, the veins of iron running through the basalt pulse faintly, as though alive. What happens after is never recorded, for those who have seen it say only that the door responds, not by opening in the way of ordinary doors, but by yielding, as if the stone itself changes state. Stories of failed attempts surround the door. Priests who tried to pry it open with tools found their efforts useless, their iron bars bending like wax while the slab remained unmarked. Candles burned down faster than normal when placed nearby, as if time itself quickened within its shadow. Even the bravest confess that standing before it brings an overwhelming sense of being watched, as though something beyond waits not to be found, but to find whoever dares approach. The Vatican's silence about this basalt slab is telling. Nowhere in official records is it listed, yet scattered notes from the 17th century describe a chamber sealed by a stone that does not belong to this earth. Some even suggest the basalt absorbs more than light and sound, that it feeds on memory itself. A priest wrote that after standing before the door he forgot his own prayer midway, unable to recall the words until he fled back into daylight. The door that drinks light is more than a barrier. It is a riddle, a threshold designed not merely to lock but to test. The brass non-key may unlock its secret, but whether that secret is meant to be entered or avoided remains uncertain. Perhaps that is why the door endures untouched. Not because it cannot be opened, but because those who know what lies beyond fear that once the light is swallowed, it may never return. Those who claim to have stepped beyond the basalt slab describe a place unlike any archive or treasury on earth. It is not a chamber lit by torches or chandeliers, nor is it decorated with frescoes or gold. The first impression is the absence of light itself. The room is kept in eternal dusk, a twilight glow that never brightens, never fades, as if time stands still. Candles sputter without fully catching flame, lamps glow weakly as though drained, yet there is always just enough illumination to see shapes and outlines. The silence is just as strange, heavy and deliberate, a hush that seems imposed on the air. The climate hums with an artificial steadiness, not warm or cold, but perfectly balanced. No draughts disturb the stillness, no dust gathers on the shelves. It is as if the room breathes in controlled rhythm, preserving its contents against decay. The walls are lined with stone shelves, each carrying sealed reliquaries of varying size and shape. Some are wooden boxes bound with wax, others metallic caskets engraved with faint sigils, and a few are simple clay jars sealed tight with resin. None are labelled, none carry descriptions. To know their contents, one would have to open them, but the very air suggests such an act would be dangerous. At the heart of the chamber stands a single table, built not for feasting nor study, but for restraint. Straps of leather stretch across its surface, yet they are not shaped for wrists or ankles. They are arranged in patterns meant to hold objects, to fix relics in place, as though they might move of their own accord. Some who have glimpsed it believe the table was used to test these relics, to hold mirrors, lenses, or devices while clerics recorded their effects. Others insist it was a form of quarantine, an attempt to control what could not be destroyed. The thought of priests binding objects as though they were alive unsettles even the most skeptical. The room carries no scent of incense, no trace of sanctity. Instead, there is a faint metallic tang, like the air after lightning, and an undercurrent of wax and oil. It feels more like a laboratory than a chapel, yet one disguised beneath layers of ritual silence. Every sound is muffled, even footsteps. Whispers seem swallowed, as if the chamber itself demands reverence. Some who have described it in journals admit they felt their sense of time slip away, uncertain whether minutes or hours had passed before they left. The Vatican denies such a place exists, but fragments of testimony from archivists and priests suggest otherwise. They speak of reliquaries stored not for devotion but for containment, of objects placed on the strapped table while monks observed in secret, and of instructions never to linger too long, lest the room itself begin to alter memory. A room kept at eternal dusk is less a vault than a liminal space, balanced between light and dark, silence and hum. Its very design suggests a truth too unstable for daylight. It is not meant to honour relics, but to keep them waiting, restrained, untouched, yet never forgotten. And within that unchanging twilight, the question lingers: who is being protected, the world outside, or the objects themselves? Among the countless priests, monks, and scribes who have guarded the Vatican's treasures, there is one figure who stands apart, a shadow whose name does not appear in any roster or chronicle. She is remembered only as the custodian of the threshold. Unlike others who served the archives, she was not a scholar of theology or a keeper of books. Her role was singular and strange. She stood at the entrance to the chamber of eternal dusk and recorded each handling of the relics in a language no one else could read. The few surviving fragments of her log reveal a cipher based on psalms. Each relic's movement was hidden within lines of scripture, words rearranged and numbered so that the untrained eye would see nothing more than pious verses. But for those who understood the key, every passage told a different story. A psalm of lament might conceal a note that the mirror that remembers had been unsealed. A psalm of praise might mask the testing of the compass of two poles. Her logs were prayers only in appearance. In truth, they were records of a silence carefully kept. She was said to be a solitary sister, bound by an oath deeper than any vow of poverty or chastity. Her oath demanded her anonymity, no name, no lineage, no memory outside the chamber. Those who glimpsed her described her as neither young nor old, her voice calm, her robes plain. She answered no questions, offered no counsel. Her entire existence revolved around the relics, recording their presence, their transfers, and their moments of awakening in a code only she fully mastered. Legends insist her oath bound her beyond death. Monks claimed that after her burial, another woman appeared in her place, carrying the same cipher and continuing the same duty. Whether this was succession carefully planned or something more spectral, no one dared to say. But across centuries, the logbook continued in the same hand, the same style, as though the custodian had never truly died. Each sister who took the role vanished from the world, becoming a faceless guardian of the threshold. What makes her figure unsettling is how she stood between power and knowledge. The Vatican trusted priests to guard scripture, inquisitors to judge heresy, but only this nameless sister was trusted with the relics themselves. It was as if her very invisibility made her incorruptible. No fame, no ambition, no history to exploit. She was a blank page, her ciphered logs the only trace of her existence. Some fragments of her code have been decoded by modern scholars, revealing chilling entries. One psalm conceals the line, "The bones remain flexible, though centuries have passed." Another hides the phrase, "The glass shows stars, unseen by our eyes." Each entry is brief, precise, without emotion, as though she feared that even a hint of feeling would betray her oath. The custodian of the threshold embodies the Vatican's strategy of silence. By erasing her name and binding her life to a cipher, the Church ensured the relics would be remembered but never revealed. She was not meant to be known, she was meant to be forgotten, leaving behind only scripture that prays with one voice and records with another. Among the sealed reliquaries of the Vatican, there is said to be a set of thin, ferrous sheets, darkened with rust, yet still strong, bound together by a strip of twisted wire. They are known only as the Gospel of Iron. Unlike the familiar manuscripts of papyrus or vellum, these pages are metal, each one etched with words in a script that matches no known language yet borrows from several. Scholars who have glimpsed the markings insist they carry fragments of Greek letters, traces of Latin, and shapes belonging to no alphabet at all. It is as though the writer spoke in tongues, yet wanted to be understood across cultures. The text itself is unsettling. Etched sayings describe a teacher who preached not in temples but on hillsides, who told his followers that no priest or bishop should stand between a soul and its source. This figure rejected intermediaries, warning that institutions would twist the truth to preserve their own power. Instead, he called for each person to carry truth within, to walk directly toward the divine without asking permission. Some of the sayings echo familiar gospels, yet others contradict them outright. One etched line reads, "The kingdom is within," and another warns, "Beware those who guard books, for they will bind you with them." The Gospel of Iron defies categorization. It is not Christian in the orthodox sense, yet it draws on sayings attributed to Jesus. It is not pagan, though some verses mention stars and cycles of the heavens as teachers in their own right. It is a fusion, a mirror of faith that suggests the early world contained many voices, not just one. If genuine, it would prove that a tradition existed where truth was shared openly outside the walls of any church. What troubles the Vatican most is the durability of the text. Unlike fragile scrolls that crumble with age, these iron sheets endure. Fire cannot easily destroy them, and time has only deepened their weight. The words etched into metal seem designed to outlast centuries, as if the teacher who spoke them knew that attempts would be made to erase his message. To destroy the Gospel of Iron would require melting it entirely, an act so obvious it could never be hidden. Thus the safest choice was silence, locking it in the chamber of eternal dusk, unseen yet preserved. A handful of notes written by archivists reveal their unease. One wrote that reading the iron pages left him sleepless, hearing the sayings echo in his mind. Another refused to continue translating, claiming the text weakened his faith in authority. The gospel did not deny God, but it denied the need for guardians of God, and that was the greatest threat of all. The Gospel of Iron is more than a relic. It is a voice from a forgotten teacher speaking across metal and time, urging people to look within rather than bow before intermediaries. And that voice, etched so deeply into iron, cannot be silenced by fire or decree. It waits in the dark, preserved not for the church, but for the day someone dares to read it aloud once more. Among the strangest relics whispered to rest in the Vatican's hidden chamber is a small wooden coffer no larger than a man's hands pressed together. Its surface is plain, carved from dark cedar, with no ornament except faint grooves worn by centuries of touch. At first glance it seems harmless, another forgotten chest stored away for safekeeping. But those who have encountered it know it by another name, the box that warms to questions. The legend says the box does not respond to silent thoughts or idle curiosity. It waits for the human voice. When a person speaks a yes or no question aloud in its presence, the cedar wood begins to grow warm, as if answering with its own pulse. Within seconds a sound follows, faint but unmistakable, like the tapping of stone against wood. Those who dared to open the coffer found a pendulum suspended inside, a smooth stone swinging with unnatural speed, striking the sides faster than a heartbeat. One side of the box produces a single hollow note, the other a sharp one, each sound serving as answer, yes or no. The simplicity of the responses hides the weight of the experience. Witnesses have described the box answering with frightening precision. One archivist asked whether he would recover from an illness that plagued him. The box warmed, the pendulum tapped the note for no, and within the year he was dead. Another monk asked whether a certain relic would ever be revealed to the world. The box struck yes, though centuries later the relic remains unseen, leaving the prophecy lingering in shadow. What makes the box terrifying is not only its answers, but the speed of its replies. The pendulum stone, does not sway gently, as physics would suggest. It thrashes in rapid rhythm, faster than any hand could push it, as if some unseen force impatiently declares its truth. Scholars who studied it briefly described feeling drained after questioning it, their hands cold despite the box's warmth. Some even claimed their dreams were haunted by the tapping sound, echoing through their sleep long after they had left the chamber. The Vatican's official stance is silence. No public record admits the box exists, though internal notes describe it as periculosum, meaning dangerous. Instructions written centuries ago warn not to ask frivolous questions, not to test its answers repeatedly, and above all, never to let crowds witness its behaviour. For if the faithful saw that an object could speak with more certainty than priests or scripture, authority itself would crumble. The box that warms to questions embodies the ancient fear of knowledge unmediated. It does not require interpretation, does not wait for clerics to translate. It answers directly, instantly, in a voice of stone and rhythm. Perhaps that is why it remains sealed in eternal dusk, its pendulum sleeping, its warmth hidden beneath cedar and silence. For if ever it were brought into the light, people would no longer ask their questions in prayer. They would ask the box, and the box, indifferent to power, would answer. Among the reliquaries sealed in the Vatican's forbidden chamber, there rests a single corroded nail, blackened with rust, its edges jagged from centuries of neglect. It is not displayed in a reliquary of gold, like the nails proclaimed to have pierced the cross of Christ. This one is hidden, its origin unnamed, its history unclaimed. Yet the whispers that surround it make it one of the most unsettling relics of all. It is called the nail that points home. The nail appears ordinary when held in the hand, cold and rough, heavy enough to suggest iron forged in antiquity. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the nail begins to creep. It drags itself across stone, wood, or glass, its sharp end scraping faint lines as it turns. After several moments, it always settles pointing in the same direction, no matter where in the Vatican it is tested. It points not toward the north, nor toward any holy shrine known to pilgrims, but toward a barren hill just outside Rome where no church has ever stood. Those who have investigated the hill describe it as unremarkable, a rise of stone and soil covered with weeds, often bypassed by travellers who do not even know its name. There are no ruins, no markers, no memory of sanctity attached to it, yet the nail insists. Each time it is set down, it aligns itself with that place, as if pulled by a memory buried in the earth. Some monks who handled the relic wrote that the hill felt heavy with silence, as though something had once happened there that history had carefully erased. The Vatican's discomfort with the nail is obvious in the way it has been kept. Notes from the 17th century reveal that tests were conducted, each one confirming the same result. When the relic was carried abroad to France, Germany, even as far as Spain, it continued to align itself, turning across maps and tables to face the hill near Rome. The implication was unavoidable. The nail carried within it a kind of memory, a pull not to the heavens but to the ground where it once belonged. Speculation has haunted scholars ever since. Some believe the nail was part of a crucifixion not recorded, a death erased because it contradicted the official story of Calvary. Others think the hill once held a shrine older than Christianity, perhaps a place of sacrifice or prophecy that the Church later sought to bury beneath silence. Whatever the truth, the relic's behaviour threatens the carefully guarded narrative of holy sites, for it suggests that the true ground of suffering and revelation may not be where pilgrims have been told to kneel. The nail that points home remains sealed, tested only in secret, never shown to the faithful. To admit its existence would raise questions no prayer could quiet. Why does it point to a forgotten hill? Who was nailed there? And why has every trace of that event been erased? Until those questions can be answered, the nail sleeps in darkness, its corroded body still restless, still seeking the place history does not want us to find. Among the sealed relics whispered about in the Vatican archives, there is one that unsettles even the most hardened archivists. It is a cloak of simple weave, grey as smoke, folded carefully within a reliquary that no priest dares to open without gloves. At first glance, it appears harmless, just fabric darkened by time. Yet its nature is anything but ordinary. Those who have touched it say it leaves no soot on the skin, no mark on stone or glass. But strangely, every ledger that describes it becomes stained with black streaks, as though ash had been dragged across the page. Ink blots, parchment smudges, whole lines turn unreadable. The stain always spreads, as if the cloak does not want to be written about. Tradition claims the cloak once covered a library as it burned, though no one agrees which library it was. Some point to Alexandria, others to Antioch, and some to a lesser-known monastic hall destroyed in the 13th century. The story goes that when the fire consumed the shelves, the cloak was thrown over the flames, not to save the books but to drink the smoke itself. Witnesses swore that the flames dimmed without extinguishing, as though the fire's memory had been absorbed by the fabric. When the library lay in ruins, the cloak was retrieved, cool to the touch, carrying no smell of smoke. Yet wherever it was later kept, people spoke of seeing faint shadows of letters drift across its folds, like ghosts of words that no longer existed. The Vatican's concern is not that the cloak is cursed, but that it might hold knowledge no longer available anywhere else. If it truly drank the smoke of burning pages, then within its fibres might remain fragments of texts long lost, words imprinted not by ink but by flame. Scholars who tried to study it claimed that when light struck its surface, faint lines appeared for a moment, letters in languages they could not fully decipher. Some thought they saw fragments of Greek philosophy, others saw diagrams of stars unknown to medieval Europe. One archivist even believed he saw a map sketched in shadow before it vanished back into grey. Yet every attempt to record these visions failed. Pens snapped, ink spilled, pages blackened with ash. It was as though the cloak allowed glimpses only to erase them the moment they were written down. The few notes that survived describe feelings of suffocation, as if standing too close to the cloak pulled smoke into the lungs, even when the air was clear. The archivists spoke of dreaming of fire, waking with the taste of soot on their tongues. The cloak of ash remains sealed because it cannot be trusted. It may carry the memory of burned knowledge, but it resists sharing it. Perhaps it guards the truth of what was lost, holding it for a time when humanity is ready, or perhaps it keeps the memory only for itself, a silent monument to all the pages consumed by fire. In its folds lies the shadow of forgotten words, a library woven into fabric, and the Vatican has chosen to let it sleep in silence rather than risk the world remembering what was once deliberately destroyed. In the heart of the Vatican archives, there is said to exist a memorandum unlike any other. It is not a theological argument or a record of papal decree. It is a policy document, carefully worded and signed by several hands, outlining a rule that has guided the handling of forbidden relics and dangerous knowledge for centuries. Its title, never printed in official indexes but whispered by archivists, is the Doctrine of Delay. The memorandum sets forth two simple commandments: never destroy and never display. The reasoning is both chilling and pragmatic. To destroy a relic or text, no matter how threatening, would risk erasing something whose purpose might later be useful. But to display it openly would unleash truths too disruptive for the fragile order of society. The solution, the document explains, is patience. Preserve everything but reveal nothing until the world can be guided to accept it as rediscovery rather than revelation. According to those who have read portions of the memorandum, the doctrine of delay treats knowledge like medicine. Too much at once can kill, too little leaves the body weak, but measured doses administered over time create the illusion of natural progress. The Renaissance, the Enlightenment, even the so-called scientific revolutions may not have been spontaneous after all. They may have been the slow release of truths, long kept in the chamber of dusk, truths framed as rediscovery to protect the authority of the Church, while still allowing civilization to advance in controlled steps. Examples within the memorandum are said to be disturbingly specific. It notes that optics, astronomy, and mechanics were not lost during the Middle Ages, but deliberately withheld. When the time was right, fragments of old manuscripts were permitted to surface, placed in the hands of select scholars who would be credited with new discoveries. In this way, history would record progress without ever realizing that the seeds had been planted centuries earlier. The Church appeared neither obstructive nor deceptive. It appeared as a faithful guardian of truth, allowing the light to return precisely when the darkness was deepest. What makes the doctrine so unsettling is the calmness of its tone. It does not speak of sin or heresy, it speaks of order. It insists that humanity is not prepared to handle sudden truths, that chaos would erupt if relics like the mirror that remembers or the gospel of iron were shown openly. Better to let such objects rest until centuries of conditioning made people ready to accept diluted versions of their messages. In this way, history could be written as a steady climb rather than a series of suppressed leaps. The doctrine of delay transforms the Vatican from custodian of faith into engineer of time. It reveals a strategy where silence is not neglect but design, where rediscovery is simply revelation postponed. And if the memorandum is real, then the greatest lie in history may not be what was hidden, but when it was revealed. For under this doctrine, truth does not die. It waits, bound in dusk, until the world is told it has found it again. In the glowing pages of history, the Renaissance is celebrated as an age of genius, when human creativity seemed to erupt after centuries of silence. Painters captured light as if it were divine. Architects raised domes that defied gravity, and scientists uncovered truths that reshaped the universe. But among the Vatican's sealed notes, there exists a disturbing suggestion. These breakthroughs may not have been born from sudden inspiration at all. They may have been borrowed brilliance, ideas reintroduced after centuries of concealment, delivered quietly through patrons who enjoyed papal favour. The notes describe unsettling parallels. A lens discovered in the hidden chamber, ground to impossible clarity, appears decades later as the foundation for telescopes credited to Galileo. The compass of two poles, said to orient differently under the moon, bears uncanny resemblance to navigational advances that guided explorers across oceans in the 15th century. Even the map without north, tucked away in eternal dusk, seems echoed in charts that appeared mysteriously in the hands of cartographers who claimed to be working from ancient sources. Each case suggests not coincidence but orchestration. The mechanism was subtle. Wealthy patrons, many of them tied to the church, sponsored artists and scientists with generous funding. But behind the gifts of gold and marble, the notes imply something more. Select objects from the chamber were shown briefly, studied in private, and then returned to silence. The artist or scholar who glimpsed them would later be credited with rediscovering a forgotten technique or inventing a new method. To the public, these men became geniuses. To the Vatican, they were instruments, channels through which controlled fragments of truth could flow back into the world without revealing the true source. Leonardo da Vinci sketched gears, flying machines, and optical devices far ahead of his time. How much of his brilliance was his own, and how much was sparked by a fleeting glimpse of relics stored in dusk? Copernicus redefined the heavens, yet his vision aligns suspiciously with records of astronomical devices hidden beneath the apostolic palace. Even Michelangelo's understanding of anatomy, so astonishing for the 16th century, may have drawn from manuscripts sealed centuries earlier. The brilliance was real, but the inspiration may have been borrowed. Why would the Vatican orchestrate such a strategy? The answer lies in control. By releasing fragments of hidden knowledge through trusted hands, the Church maintained its position as guardian of truth. Discovery was permitted, but only at a pace that could be managed. Innovation appeared spontaneous, but behind the curtain, it was scripted, timed and framed as rediscovery. In this way, the Renaissance became not a natural rebirth of learning, but a carefully curated unveiling, ensuring that the authority of the Church remained intact even as the world stepped into light. Borrowed brilliance does not diminish the achievements of those men. It reveals something far darker. Humanity may not have awakened on its own. It may have been gently stirred from sleep, handed dreams already written centuries before. And in the chamber of dusk, the true spark of those dreams still waits, unseen, while history praises the names of men who may only have carried the light handed to them in silence. Among the thousands of saints honoured in churches and whispered about in prayer, there is one whose story unravels under closer inspection. His name is recited in litanies, his image painted in gilded icons, his miracles praised as proof of divine favour. Yet hidden deep within the Vatican Archives lies a file that tells a different story, a file that should not exist. It suggests that this saint was never what people were told. He was not a holy man singled out by heaven. He was a figure built from staged wonders, miracles performed not by divine power, but with objects drawn from the chamber of eternal dusk. He is remembered today as the saint who wasn't. The file describes in detail the miracles that raised him to beatification. One miracle involved a mirror said to reveal visions. Witnesses claimed the saint foretold the death of a nobleman days before it happened. Another miracle involved a strange compass that shifted its needle with the moon. He was celebrated for guiding lost travellers across treacherous terrain, his sense of direction called supernatural. The greatest of his miracles was performed with the shard of impossible glass. It is said he healed a blind child by holding the lens to her eyes. The crowd believed it was a divine blessing. In reality, the file notes, the cloak of secrecy, ensured no one realized he had borrowed a relic kept hidden from the world. The staged miracles were not acts of devotion, they were acts of politics. At the time, the Church was facing fierce opposition to its reforms. Trust in its authority was waning. The creation of a saint, complete with public miracles, served as proof that heaven still stood with Rome. Crowds who doubted the clergy found their doubts silenced in the face of wonders. Reforms passed with less resistance, cloaked in the aura of sanctity, and while the people believed in a holy man, the true sources of his power, the relics, were quietly returned to the chamber. What makes the deception chilling is how carefully it was orchestrated. The file contains handling logs signed by the custodian of the threshold, each entry coded within psalms. One psalm conceals the words "mirror lent to brother in June," another notes compass returned after pilgrimage. The evidence is clear. The saint's miracles were rehearsed, timed, and approved. Yet once canonized, the truth was buried, the relics sealed away once more, the saint's name endured, the relics vanished from memory. This manipulation raises disturbing questions. How many other saints may have been elevated not for their holiness, but for their usefulness? How many miracles were staged to preserve faith at critical moments in history? To question one saint is to question the machinery that manufactures sanctity itself. The saint who wasn't reminds us that even holiness can be scripted, that faith can be guided by illusions drawn from shadows. He became immortal in the eyes of believers, yet behind the veil, his sanctity was a mask, one designed to protect power and to bury forever the sources of his so-called miracles. In the labyrinth of Vatican records, hidden among thousands of ordinary receipts and cargo slips, there exists a cluster of documents stamped with a faint crescent symbol. These papers describe shipments carried only at night, each entry marked with the phrase "cart of night." The language is cold and administrative, but the meaning beneath it is anything but ordinary. The slips detail nocturnal transfers of sealed crates to what are described as satellite sacristies, small chapels, and monasteries scattered across Europe. The shipments moved without public notice, guarded in silence, and always under the cover of darkness. The crates were logged as liturgical hardware, chalices, vestments, candles. Yet each slip contains a telling detail. When a cart departed the Vatican, it carried a full manifest, heavy and sealed. When the same cart returned, the manifest was shorter. Objects listed as lent were noted as absent, replaced with brief lines like narrative replenished or relic rested. The pattern suggests that relics were not stored simply for safekeeping. They were used. Taken from the chamber of eternal dusk, they were placed into the world for brief performances, woven into stories that reinforced belief, and then returned, stripped of their role, as if the object itself had been drained of its purpose. Whispers claim that the Cart of Night was part of a strategy stretching across centuries. When faith wavered, when revolts stirred or reforms met resistance, relics were dispatched to rural churches or influential patrons. A nail that moved on its own, a cloak that hinted of fire, a mirror that showed more than reflection. Each relic became the silent actor in a miracle staged at precisely the right moment. Once the story spread and the faithful were secured, the relic was withdrawn quietly. But when it returned to the Vatican, it was not the same. Its aura was dimmed, its legend already harvested. The crate came back emptier, but the narrative, the miracle, lived on in sermons and chronicles. Archivists who uncovered these slips described them with unease. They read like evidence of a theatre, a system where faith was managed like a performance, props carried in carts by moonlight, actors chosen without ever knowing the script they played. The people who witnessed the miracles never suspected the object would vanish the next day, leaving only the story behind. Yet, that story was enough. The miracle did not need to endure physically, only in memory. The Cart of Night is perhaps the most haunting symbol of control. It reveals a machine where relics are not honoured but deployed, not revered but consumed like fuel to light brief flames of belief. And in the shadows of those nocturnal journeys, truth became a commodity, carried from place to place until nothing of the object remained except its legend. The Vatican did not need to destroy the relics. It needed only to use them, let their power spill into the world for a moment, then lock them away again, silent and dim. And so, through the carts that rolled unseen in darkness, miracles were manufactured, narratives replenished, and history reshaped without a trace. Among the many sealed envelopes buried in Vatican vaults lies a series of letters that do not speak of theology or doctrine but of bargains. They are written in the elegant hand of kings, emperors, and popes, yet the tone is not one of devotion. It is negotiation, a careful exchange of favours and threats, bound by wax seals and the weight of centuries. Together, these letters are known as the concordat of silence, an agreement between church and state that reveals a chilling truth. The Vatican was not alone in hiding relics and forbidden discoveries. Secular rulers were willing partners, their silence purchased with promises of stability, borders, and crowns. The letters show a disturbing rhythm. A relic unearthed in the ruins of a monastery, a manuscript hinting at a history that contradicts official timelines, or an object too advanced for its supposed age would surface. Local rulers would be informed, often by the Jesuit conduit or by papal envoys. Then came the bargain. Suppress the find, hand it over, and in return, the Vatican would recognize the ruler's legitimacy, sanctify their rule with holy ceremonies, or bless a disputed border. For kings desperate for divine approval, the trade was irresistible. The church gained the relic, the crown gained stability, the people gained nothing but silence. One letter from the 13th century describes a noble house that discovered a set of iron sheets etched with forbidden sayings. Within weeks, the family received papal favour and support in a border dispute, while the sheets vanished into the archives. Another letter from the 16th century thanks a monarch for returning a lens of impossible clarity, promising in exchange the coronation of his son as divinely chosen heir. The relics disappeared, the rulers prospered, and history was rewritten as if none of it had ever occurred. What makes the concordat so dangerous is not only the secrecy, but the unity it forged. The church and secular power, often rivals in public, stood hand in hand when truth threatened the order both depended upon. For rulers, suppressed knowledge prevented rebellion, for knowledge inspires change. For the Vatican, it preserved the image of being the sole guardian of divine truth. The pact was not written in a single treaty, but stitched across centuries through letters and signatures, each generation renewing the silence as the price of peace. The Concordat of Silence explains why so few of the world's strangest finds ever reached the public. They were never simply stolen. They were exchanged, traded for crowns, borders, and thrones. The pact reveals that history was shaped not by discovery, but by the decision to bury discovery beneath ritual and ceremony. When kings bowed before the Pope, when emperors knelt for coronation, the gesture was more than humility. It was gratitude. Gratitude for silence, gratitude for shared secrecy, gratitude for a pact that allowed both throne and altar to stand untouchable. And in that pact, truth was the currency, a currency too costly ever to spend. In the long history of the hidden chamber, the archivists who guarded it were expected to be invisible. Their duty was to copy, to code, to record without question. Their very identities were erased, leaving only scripture-shaped ciphers to mark their presence. But at some point in the 17th century, something changed. A new custodian arrived, one who obeyed the rules in appearance, yet quietly betrayed them in ink. Her rebellion was not loud, it was not violent. It lived in margins, in misfiled codes, in the kind of mistakes that might look accidental to her superiors, but which, when gathered together, formed a trail of breadcrumbs. Today she is remembered not by her name, which is lost, but by her quiet defiance. She is known as the archivist who revolted. The revolt began subtly, in one psalmic cipher, describing the movement of the mirror that remembers. She underlined a single word in a faint, almost invisible stroke. Later entries show similar marks, each highlighting words that, when read together, form sentences of doubt. One phrase reads simply, "Why hide what speaks truth?" Another says, "History deserves more than silence." No one would notice unless they compared the entries carefully. But for the rare reader who did, the meaning became clear. She was speaking through the margins, breaking the oath of invisibility, one stroke at a time. Her acts grew bolder. A relic was misfiled under the wrong psalm, its code pointing to a different chest than the one in which it rested. To her superiors it seemed a clerical mistake, but to a future reader it would serve as a breadcrumb, proof that someone had resisted the system of perfect silence. She even inserted verses that did not exist, ciphers that led nowhere, as though daring others to chase shadows just to realize that not all codes obeyed the rules. Each act was a reminder that obedience had been cracked. The Vatican, obsessed with order, might never have discovered her rebellion if not for a complaint filed by a fellow archivist. The logs, he noted, contained irregularities that confused the record of relic transfers. Investigations followed, but the evidence of defiance was too subtle to condemn outright. The margins were dismissed as quirks, the misfiles as errors, yet those breadcrumbs endured, silent testimony that at least one custodian had refused to let secrecy pass unchallenged. For historians today, these tiny acts of defiance are more valuable than any relic. They prove that doubt existed inside the walls, that even those closest to the forbidden chamber could sense the weight of silence pressing too heavily. The archivist's revolt may not have toppled the system, but it cracked its veneer of perfection. She left behind a message not for her peers, but for the future, a whisper hidden in scripture, a trail left for anyone daring enough to follow. The chamber remains sealed, the relics still bound in dusk. But because of one archivist's rebellion, the silence is no longer flawless. Somewhere between the lines of psalms and the strokes of a pen, resistance lives, waiting for another reader to pick up the trail she left behind. Among the relics kept in the chamber of eternal dusk, there is one that unsettles even the most hardened keepers. It is a sealed sphere of stone, smooth as river rock, no larger than a child's head. Unlike other relics, it bears no seal of the church, no catalogue number written in cipher. For centuries it was considered inert, placed on a shelf and left to gather dust. But records speak of nights when the sphere betrayed its silence, cracking open of its own accord, as though it refused to remain closed. Inside was not relic bone, nor shard of glass, but a star chart. And this chart did something no map of the heavens should ever do. The dates written upon it shifted, as if time itself were alive on the page. The star chart was painted on parchment so fine it seemed almost translucent. Constellations stretched across its surface, some familiar, some unrecognizable. Yet the most disturbing detail was the way annotations changed from one viewing to the next. A monk who studied it in the 15th century noted that the year inscribed beneath an eclipse altered when he returned the following day. A later archivist swore the chart showed comets yet to appear, their paths marked decades before they blazed across the sky. One even claimed the parchment recorded events of the past differently than official calendars, as though history itself was fluid when seen through the eyes of the stars. Attempts to contain the relic proved futile. Wax seals melted without heat, chains wrapped around the sphere cracked as if strained by unseen force. The Vatican ordered the sphere locked in a reliquary of iron, yet still witnesses described faint sounds of stone grinding open in the night. Each time the sphere split, the chart within seemed to have shifted again, its annotations rewriting time as though refusing to accept the version kept by men. What terrifies scholars most is the implication that the sphere does not simply record, but corrects. If the chart truly adjusts itself, then it reveals a timeline that contradicts the one taught in schools and sermons. The phantom, centuries long, suspected by fringe historians, might find proof here, etched in constellations that no decree can erase, for the heavens do not lie. The stars wheel on their eternal path, indifferent to human calendars, and yet the parchment inside the sphere dares to rewrite those calendars with every crack it opens. The Vatican's strategy has been silence. The relic is labelled unusable, its study forbidden, its existence denied in public. But the logs betray their fear. Phrases like sphere refuses custody and chart alters nightly suggest that even the keepers cannot command it. Unlike the cloak of ash or the box that warms to questions, this relic resists all containment. It refuses to be hidden, refuses to remain still, refuses to be silenced. The sealed stone sphere is more than a relic. It is a witness that will not be tamed, a reminder that truth cannot be forever buried in vaults. For when time itself insists on correcting the record, no doctrine, no decree, and no lock of iron can keep it still. It is one thing to study whispers of the Vatican's hidden chamber, to piece together fragments of logs and testimonies, to chase shadows left behind in margins. It is another to be invited inside. The moment came quietly, without ceremony. A folded letter slid across a desk, its wax seal unmarked, its words brief. The archivist of the threshold was gone, her post now vacant. The invitation was clear. Learn the cipher, inherit the silence, decide what the world will and will not remember. It was not an honour. It was a burden wrapped in secrecy, an offer that felt less like a gift than a trap. The letter promised training. I would be taught the psalmic codes used to disguise relic transfers, the rituals required to unlock reliquaries, the methods of ensuring logs remained undecipherable to uninitiated eyes. More importantly, I would inherit the authority to handle what others feared to touch. The mirror sealed with wax, the compass that turned with the moon, the box that warmed to questions. Each relic would pass through my hands, but not for study or revelation. My duty would be to ensure their continued sleep, to guard silence, not truth. The choice presented itself like freedom, yet every line of the letter revealed its weight. To accept was to join a lineage of custodians who erased themselves from history. No family, no recognition, no grave marked with a name. The cipher would bind me, my existence reduced to coded initials scrawled in the margins of psalms. To refuse was to risk exposure, for simply knowing of the chamber already set me apart from the rest of the world. Refusal could never mean forgetting. It could only mean danger. What unsettled me most was not the secrecy, but the responsibility. In accepting, I would hold power unlike any ruler. Not power of armies or wealth, but power of memory. I would choose what the world might rediscover and what it would never see again. If the doctrine of delay was real, then I would become its living extension, rationing knowledge as though it were medicine, keeping truths locked away not because they were false, but because they were inconvenient. Could I decide what humanity was ready for, or would I simply become another link in a chain of guardians too afraid to trust the world with itself? The offer burned in my thoughts. I imagined lifting the iron lid of the reliquary that held the stone sphere, feeling it crack open unbidden in my hands, the shifting star chart daring me to show it to the world. I imagined holding the Gospel of Iron, its etched sayings rejecting intermediaries, and wondered whether I had already become the very thing that teacher warned against. Perhaps the invitation was not a choice at all, but a test. To accept meant silence. To refuse meant erasure. As I held the letter, the weight of centuries pressed down. Countless custodians had faced this moment, each deciding to vanish into cipher and oath. Now it was my turn. The chamber waited. The relics slept, and the decision of what the world will and will not remember stood before me, disguised as an offer, but sounding more like fate. It began with a press release that seemed ordinary. A fragment of parchment had been recently discovered in the archives of a small European monastery. The announcement was quiet, almost buried beneath other news, presented as the kind of academic curiosity that excites scholars but rarely touches the wider world. The parchment carried diagrams of mechanical gears, sketched centuries earlier, astonishingly advanced for its time. Experts declared it a rare find, a glimpse of forgotten ingenuity. To most, it was little more than an interesting headline, but beneath the surface, something far larger had shifted. The parchment was not a chance discovery. It was a relic long sealed in the chamber of eternal dusk, chosen carefully to be released under the doctrine of delay. By presenting it as a recent find, the Vatican achieved two things at once. It fed the world a small taste of wonder, enough to satisfy curiosity, while concealing the truth that countless other such diagrams already slept in the vaults. The world believed it had stumbled upon lost brilliance. In reality, it had been permitted to see only what had been decided long ago. At first, nothing seemed to change. Scholars debated the origins of the parchment, speculating whether the sketches had inspired later machines of the Renaissance. Journalists wrote brief articles, calling it proof that history was more complex than textbooks suggested. For the ordinary person, it was trivia, a story that faded as quickly as it appeared. But for those who looked deeper, the implications were staggering. If such sophistication existed centuries earlier, then what else had been hidden? What other inventions had been delayed, waiting for the right moment to emerge? The parchment became a seed, planted quietly in the collective mind. Students began asking why so many discoveries were surfacing only now. Researchers noticed the same phrases repeated in announcements: uncovered in storage, rediscovered in monastery, long overlooked in archives. Patterns emerged. The world began to suspect that its past was not simply forgotten, but managed. The opened window did not flood the room with light. It allowed a thin beam to enter, just enough to remind people that there was more beyond the wall. For the Vatican, this was the perfect outcome. The parchment shifted nothing in doctrine, threatened no core teaching. yet subtly reshaped the way people thought about history. It sowed questions while offering no answers. It proved the usefulness of the doctrine of delay, showing that even one small release could redirect thought without ever challenging authority outright. The world carried on, but it carried on slightly altered, like a river nudged by a single stone. The opened window did not shatter faith, it did not topple power, but it changed everything in silence. It reminded the world that discovery is rarely discovery, that truth often enters not as revelation but as permission, and once a window is opened, however slightly, it cannot be closed again. The air shifts, the light lingers, and the question of what else lies beyond the wall becomes impossible to forget. The chamber is quiet, as it has always been. The air holds the stillness of centuries, thick with dust yet unnaturally clean, as though the room itself resists decay. Around me, the relics rest in their reliquaries, each one a question sealed in metal and glass, the mirror that remembers, the compass of two poles, the cloak that drank a library's smoke, and in the centre, the stone sphere that refuses silence, its seam faintly glowing as if waiting to open again. I stand at the threshold with the key that is not a key still warm in my hand, knowing that the choice before me is not about objects, but about time itself. The oath of the custodian is clear. Guard the relics, preserve the silence, delay truth until the world is ready. Every archivist before me has chosen obedience, their names erased, their lives folded into cipher and code. They locked the door and vanished into history, ensuring that the doctrine of delay lived on. If I follow them, the chamber will sleep for another century. Humanity will continue its slow march, believing in rediscoveries that were planned, in miracles that were staged, in histories that were edited into smooth stories. Order will remain intact. Faith will remain unchallenged. The world will remain unchanged. Yet, as I look at the relics, I feel the weight of another possibility. What if the door remains ajar? What if I let the world wander in, not with a flood, but with a trickle, one question at a time? The risk is undeniable. Knowledge can be dangerous. The Gospel of Iron alone could shatter centuries of theology. The shifting star chart could unravel calendars, dynasties, and the very way we measure time. The box that answers questions might tempt people to abandon reason altogether. To open the door fully would be chaos, but to leave it cracked, to let curiosity breathe, perhaps that would be enough. I imagine a student reading a strange note in the margin of a psalm, following it to a misfiled code left by the rebellious archivist centuries ago. I imagine a researcher stumbling upon an image of a relic mislabeled in a catalogue, realizing it should not exist. Each discovery would not be a revelation, but an invitation. The world would not be handed the truth. It would be allowed to find it, piece by piece, as though rediscovering itself. That is the power of an open window, a door left unlatched. As I stand at the threshold, I realize that silence is not the only form of control, so is choice, and in this moment, the choice is mine. I can seal the chamber and vanish into cipher, or I can leave the door ajar, trusting that humanity is ready to stumble toward its own answers. The relics do not speak. The chamber hums softly, waiting. I place my hand on the basalt door, feel it drink the light of the candles, and make my decision. Whatever happens after this moment will be called Afterlife. The time when the darkness was no longer perfect, when a single question slipped through the cracks and the world began to remember.